My name is Chris Hendrickson. I'm a longstanding faculty member at Carnegie Mellon University, and I have the honor of being the moderator for our second panel. The second panel is about COVID-19. How has mobility changed and impacted deployment? I can't think of a more important issue right now. We're all living through what is essentially a lifetime experience associated with the global COVID-19 pandemic. It's affecting everyone and everything. It's affected our public health. It's affected our economy. It's affected our social interactions. And it certainly affected our transportation systems and our travel. Now, we've already heard about some of the impacts with respect to equity in the previous panel, and I'll be very much interested in hearing what our panelists and our participants have to say during this second panel. We're very fortunate to have 5 individuals to speak with us who are all distinguished and experienced and have different perspectives on the pandemic. They are Yassmin Gramian, the Secretary of Transportation of the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, Chuck Hammel, the Chief Executive Officer of Pitt, Ohio, a trucking company headquartered here in Western Pennsylvania, Larry Rilett, a distinguished professor at the University of Nebraska and also head of one of our sister university transportation centers. Vincent Valdes, the Chief Executive Officer of the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission, who also has a long-standing experience from the Federal Transit Administration. Connie McGee, the Board President of the Association for Commuter Transportation. We're very grateful to have all of you participating. I won't read their entire bios. They're all distinguished and knowledgeable professionals. Lisa, in her email, has provided a link to the website that has bios for each of them. What we propose to do for this panel is to have each of them speak in turn. And I hope that we will have time for questions at the end of the session. If you have questions that come up while people are speaking, please just put them into the chat box. Lisa Kay and I will be monitoring that. And Lisa Kay, I hope, will be handling all the handoffs for slide presentations. We will conclude, by the way, at 2:30, and shortly before 2:30, I'll turn it back over to Lisa Kay so she can introduce tomorrow's activities. So with that, I'll turn it over to our first speaker. Yassmin, are you ready to go?
I am, and thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. I do have to say, among the things that were impacted by COVID is also our budget, the state budget. And as you know, our budget was passed. We received a 5 months budget back in July of 2020. And right now we're in the midst of a negotiation for the remainder of the year. And unfortunately, I can't be with you the whole time. So I'm going to give my presentation, and I have to excuse myself because I have calls lined up with the state reps, and I need to attend that. It's really important, as much as I like to spend the entire time with the team and the panels, but I also have made some commitments. I've been called into some calls. So I just wanted to share, what you just mentioned, the impact of COVID and how the academia can help us moving forward, Department of Transportation and so forth. COVID has had such an enormous impact on everybody's lives, right? And I think we're going to be feeling it for many years to come. As for the immediate impacts that the pandemic has had on PennDOT, they were significant. We closed our districts, our county offices, central offices, driver's license centers, and we paused all our construction contracts until we could assess what we were facing from this pandemic. Thanks to collaborations with Pennsylvania Turnpike, Federal Highway Administration, construction industry, consulting industries, we developed COVID-19 safety plans so that we could quickly restart our construction contracts and continue to bid new projects. We also initially closed our roadside rest areas and welcome centers so we could determine how best to ensure that these highly trafficked locations would be properly cleaned and maintained during the spread of the highly contagious virus. We began reopening the rest areas the day after they were closed with enhanced cleaning and maintenance measures in place. We instituted safety protocols for our 7,000 person maintenance force across the 11 districts to conduct summer maintenance activities and prepare for winter maintenance activities. Our driver and vehicle services operations are some of our most public touch points, as you know, and it was critical that when we reopened, and that happened in June, strict safety measures were in place to protect our customers and staff. It was in May, to reduce the number of customers who had to physically visit this driver's license center. We implemented system changes that would allow customers renew their driver's license or ID cards to use their existing photos on file rather than coming in for a new photo. And that enabled over 1 million customers from having to visit a driver's license center in person and helping them to, helping to mitigate their risk and protect our employees as well at the same time. This situation forced all of us to take a hard look at our operation and figure out how we can continue to operate under this unprecedented circumstances. I would like to touch on the subject of innovation. I'm very proud of the many ways that our staff handled the ongoing changes, their openness and flexibility with our operations, embracing innovations that came about as a result of that. For example, we've changed processes for digital signatures and seals on plans that allowed our consultant design contracts to continue. We are exploring 3D intelligent models for design, construction, asset management. We are exploring augmented reality for design field activities, bridge inspection, and for construction site meetings. Our vision is that by 2025, construction projects will be bid using 3D technology and no longer be in a traditional construction plan format. We have already made some great advancements in public involvement, and our digital delivery directive will further enhance those efforts. Instead of trying to teach the general public how to interpret a plan, we will instead hand them virtual reality goggles and let them test drive the project themselves. Augmented reality will also be piloted this year for use in design field activities, bridge inspections, and construction projects. This technology will also allow us to visualize model elements and construction sequencing and a whole bunch of other stuff that goes into real world setting. We're also exploring the use of drones for construction inspection, for bridge inspection, for survey, for incident management, air traffic, quantity takeoff, project sequencing, and all areas where drones can come handy. On the construction side, we're eliminating the need for paper tickets and increasing efficiency through e-ticketing for contractors' payment. And that's actually been going on for quite some time. We're also using automation to help keep our workers safe in the work zone. And this is something that we're very proud of because it came out of collaboration with Pennsylvania Turnpike and State Police. We launched a 5-year pilot program for automated work zone speed enforcement. We have placed portable units deployed in active work zones, and with the use of combination of cameras and radar to detect the vehicles that go 11 miles over the permitted speed limit, posted speed limit, I should say, and we issue citations. And our analysis so far is showing that the program is starting to have the desired effect of reducing speeding through work zones, which was very important to us. We've also continued to make progress in the automated vehicle world. We updated our automated vehicle testing guidance in September. One important update to this guidance that is significant in light of COVID-19 is that we established protocol to transition from 2 safety operators in a vehicle to 1. This change will help, of course, with social distancing while testing this technology. In addition to the operational challenges that we face, COVID-19 has also impacted our funding, especially for highways and bridges. PennDOT receives more than 74% of its highway and bridge funding from the state and federal gas tax, as you know. And due to major traffic reductions in the early days of the pandemic, we lost a significant amount of revenue. We are anticipating a loss of between $500 to $600 million between now and June of 2021. We've already lost nearly about 400 million. We're happy that the traffic volumes are coming back. It's not at where it was prior to the pandemic, but almost at 85%, I would say. However, the revenue that's gone is gone for good. And before pandemic, we knew that our funding issues were significant, and we can no longer rely on the gas tax to meet our highway and bridge needs. And on top of that, the federal government hasn't taken meaningful action to support transportation in years. Our challenge now is transitioning from reliance on the gas tax and raising enough revenue to keep up with the inflation and addressing our aging infrastructure. As our needs continue to grow and significant risks to existing revenues are identified, we as an agency are forced to look into alternative means of funding that are emerging across the nation. To that end, we recently launched a new initiative called PennDOT Pathways, through which we will analyze new future-focused sources of funding for our highways and bridges that could better serve our communities. As part of this program, we are embarking on a planning and environmental linkages called PEL study. In this PEL study, we're looking at potential funding solutions and identifying which ones could be used in the near and long term to help build stable and dedicated transportation funding for Pennsylvania. Once we identify the potential funding strategies that best fit our system, we will develop a plan for putting them into action and start to fill in the funding gap for our highways and bridges. Please stay tuned for more updates on the Pathways program in the coming months. So, as part of this conversation, we were asked to consider how researchers can help transportation, and that is a great question. One example would be processing and analysis of data, especially big data. Additionally, researchers can also assist with the development and assessment of metrics. For example, PennDOT currently works with Purdue University on the implementation of probe data performance measures at signalized intersection. Researchers can also help provide insight to new and emerging technologies through ongoing research. PennDOT is currently working with CMU and Penn State to assess the safe integration of automated vehicles in work zones. Additionally, workforce development is another great opportunity for collaboration with the research community. Academic institutions can help with employee training on new and emerging technologies. For example, PennDOT participated in the University of Maryland's Operations Academy every year. And finally, through their ongoing research and connections with industry, academia can provide a much needed insight into preparing our transportation network for the future. Academia can also help with the development of strategic plans and scenario planning. For example, we work with CMU to develop our connected and automated autonomous vehicle 2040 vision, which explored the impacts of connected and autonomous vehicle in several areas, from real-time data usage and workforce training needs to driver licensing and freight flow as they relate to PennDOT. Again, I'm sorry I had to go through all these talking points very fast, but I wanted to thank you for the opportunity that you've given me to join you today. I wanted to emphasize that collaboration with all of our partners, whether it's on the construction or trucking industry, our planning partners, is critical, and academia is critical to our success. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'll turn things back to Chuck Hammel.
Well, I'll thank you, Yassmin, before you leave. It's inspiring to see you coping with all the challenges here in this year of the pandemic. And good luck on your revenue decision making.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Be safe.
Chuck, I'll turn it over to you.
Chuck, your microphone is muted.
Okay, how's that?
Much better.
Much better.
Okay, I'll start from the beginning again. Thanks again for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Chuck Hammel, and I'm president and CEO of Pitt, Ohio. Pitt, Ohio is a third-generation family business. We are a next-day shipment delivery company servicing the Midwest, the Central States, and New England. Primarily next-day delivery. We handle shipments for a variety of industries. We are also an employee-centric organization, and we place a high value in contributing to our community while using sustainable business practices. I've been with the company for 40 years. The effects of COVID have been dramatic for everyone, and it's been dramatic to our industry as well. You know, from the time the governor issued stay-at-home orders, we were considered an essential business. So we needed to continue to operate as we always have, with the exception of those employees that could stay home. We wanted to send them home to work. At the freight terminals, the majority of the employees still had to come in with drivers and dock workers and then some office staff to support them with paperwork and such. But our home office, we sent home 75 or 85% of the employees, and really only have a skeleton crew today. Thankfully, we have a strong IT group, and we were able to handle that transition, and it went very smoothly. We changed all the procedures at the freight terminals. Safety of the employees and the customers were our first priority. On this first slide, Lisa, okay, thank you. On this first slide is some of the procedure changes and safety procedures that we had with the drivers themselves. Now, I have a couple of slides on these, but I'm not going to go through each one in an effort to save some time. But some of the things that we did were just dramatic compared to business as usual. One was the contactless delivery. We wanted to social distance our drivers from our customers. And typically, when you make a delivery, you need to find the person that ordered the shipment to sign the bill. Now, the bill is a contract saying that we own that shipment from the time it moved origin until the time it gets to destination. So the thought of just leaving the shipment on the dock with a copy of the bill with no signature, you know, kind of concerned us a little bit from a liability standpoint. But that has worked. It has worked well, and it has kept our drivers very safe. We removed all the lunchroom furniture to keep from having gatherings. We have shift meetings every day with our drivers for communication. We move those all outside onto the dock. And we give each driver disinfectant each day so they can carry it with them for anything they think needs disinfected. On the next slide is what we did at our terminal operations. So we have our terminal operations where all the trucks are, and then we have our home office. At the freight terminals, we have 22 of those. We installed thermometers at the entryway, and every employee had to take their temperature daily. We put out a self-quarantine for anyone that had been in contact with anybody positive for COVID. We put a new no visitor policy in, and we sanitized the trucks, the dock equipment, and the office twice daily. Again, the safety and security of our employees was our first priority. On the last slide is what we did at our corporate office. And as you can see, it's pretty extensive. A few of the things is we sanitize daily. High touch points, we sanitize twice daily. So elevators, handrails, bathrooms, anywhere where there was high touch. Now, we only have a skeleton crew at the home office since the majority have been working from home, but we had the same safety procedures regardless for the entire building for a handful of employees, as the same as if it would have been for full staff. Cleaning supplies were supplied to each workstation that employees worked at, so they had their own sanitizing. We put antibacterial soap in all the restrooms. Now, currently, we have 9 positive cases, and none of those were contacted at work. It was all from an outside source. So we feel that what we're doing is really keeping our employees safe. These protocols remain in effect today and for the foreseeable future. Now, from a business level standpoint, it was very dramatic. We were very strong in January, February, and March. Even at the very beginning of the pandemic, we were extremely busy because grocery stores shelves were being emptied and so forth. But the beginning of April through May and June, business levels fell 30%. And then we didn't know which customers were actually going to be in. So we needed to call every single customer that we had a delivery for to make sure they were open. And it was very critical for us to get all of our essential freight delivered every day. Then as July came along and through August, September, and October, business surged to the point of overcapacity. Currently, our industry is well over capacity. I don't know if you've been following the FedEx and UPS reports and how Christmas shipments are going to be delayed. But they estimate that between the capacity of Amazon, FedEx, UPS, and the post office, that they still come up 1 million packages a day short of capacity. So it's going to create a real problem. So when they tell you that you better, if you're going to order online for Christmas, I would really recommend that you do it early. It's going to get really dicey as it gets closer to the holidays. So COVID really created unprecedented volatility. We feel we went through 4, maybe 5 business cycles in the last 7 months, which is just hard to imagine. Currently, we are 125 drivers short. So for an industry that's over capacity, and you can't hire enough drivers to fill the trucks, it creates an even bigger problem. And compounded with that, I had mentioned that we only had 9 employees out of 3,100 that had tested positive. The issue we're having is we have 70 to 80 employees system-wide a day that call in and say, I've been exposed to someone. So these employees need to quarantine for 14 days before coming back to work. So it creates a real shortage of capacity in the market. So how did COVID affect mobility? For us, it actually helped in our world. Our drivers, as I mentioned, their delivery has changed, made them more productive. And a typical driver on a given day would park their car and go into the office and punch the clock and pick up their paperwork and then go to their truck and go out and deliver. Well, we cut the office part out. So today, our drivers go straight from their car to their truck. Their paperwork is in it, and then they call into the office and they clock them in from there. And the same as when they come back. So it's really reduced our employee contact at the place of work. And something else that made us pretty more productive was until recently, traffic was much less than it has been traditionally. The trucking industry overall loses several $billions alone on congestion every year. sitting in traffic and sitting behind accidents. And then again, many of our work from home employees we're finding are way more productive than they had been at work for a variety of reasons. And the benefit is they like working from home. So our sense is that post-COVID, we will have flexibility to work at home and at the office, however the employee chooses to work. And probably one of the bigger overall issues that have come from this is that our customers have prioritized digitizing their supply chain. Now, we have for years pushed our customers and tried to get them to connect with us more electronically, but we're in a paper-based industry and those changes are slow. Well, thanks to COVID, with all of our customers also working from home, they see the value in having the relationship with their trading partners digitized. So we're seeing that go a lot higher on the priority list. So what are the gaps in response that maybe research can address? Well, as we all know, personal protective gear was in short supply. How can this be addressed for the next pandemic? You know, for instance, what U.S. factories can be repurposed to manufacture this equipment? You know, much like the auto dealers or auto manufacturers switch production to ventilators. You know, what other manufacturers within the country, you know, could in a drop of a hat start to manufacture protective products? That I think will be a big thing moving forward, since you know, the next pandemic probably isn't too far behind. And with these kind of materials, we really need to have those closer to use. And while we're in a global environment, I think certain protective equipment needs to be manufactured here in the U.S., but you can't really manufacture it and store it because it does have an expiration date. So some way to quickly shift production to protective supplies, you know, could be a good thing to research. And then maybe how the federal and state government can coordinate with supply chains, transportation companies, so that they're not putting their new changes in a vacuum. And you heard Yassmin mention that they had closed the rest areas till they assessed, you know, how they were going to address those. Well, the trucking industry counts very heavily on rest areas. All of the drivers are on a certain amount of hours for driving, and they need these rest areas for their breaks and for their night off. And it created a real a safety concern, because with rest areas closed and drivers that by federal law cannot drive beyond a certain amount of hours, we're forced to park on the side of the highways, and that's dangerous for everyone. So if we can kind of coordinate what the state is doing, what the federal government is doing, what the supply chains needs are of various industries, and then the transportation companies, and sort of coordinate these in a little bit better fashion, rather than every agency and company for themselves. So those would be my comments, and that concludes my comments for today.
Thank you very much, Chuck. We'll move on to Larry.
Great, thanks, Chris. I'm assuming everyone can hear me okay and see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to talk about the university perspective. So from a university perspective, COVID's obviously been awful. I can't stress that enough. But you know, if you're looking at it from a research perspective, it does give us an opportunity for a natural experiment, right? We can ask, Yassmin was talking about metrics and measures. Chuck was talking about the reliability in that. That's what I'm going to sort of focus on, and then come back to a broader picture. But it does allow us to look at, you know, are the roadways safer during the pandemic? Is the pandemic result more reliable arterial roadway travel times? So it allows us to answer a number of questions that have some interest to the people on this call. The volume effects, we all know, we heard everyone talking about the drop in volume, particularly among passenger cars, not so much as freight. In Nebraska, we had a 29% decrease in March statewide for traffic. We had correspondingly had an increase in what I would call poor driving. We had over 1,000 tickets given for 100 miles per hour in 2020, which is a 68% increase. So less traffic, more crazy drivers. This was also shown in the US, across the US. 2020, there was a decrease in the volume. There was also a decrease in the fatalities, but much less, 3.3% compared to 2019. Why was that? More speeding, as I indicated, more impaired driving, more bad behavior from drivers. So the reality was the traffic fatality rate actually went up. So while fatalities went down, they didn't go down as much as the volume. So our rate went up, and it went up about 20%. So when you start looking at fatality rates in the in the coming years, you're going to see this sort of blip go up, and it's because of this COVID pandemic. I want to talk briefly about about travel time reliability. This is sort of what Chuck was indicating in his talk, and Yassmin to a bit. Travel time reliability is just the consistency or dependency in travel time, right? So how much congestion are you having? How much spread in travel times are you having from day to day and across different times of the day? And as I said, COVID-19 gave a good example of a natural experiment. We can look and see how did travel times change. We at our university, at our center, looked at arterial roadway corridors in Nebraska. We looked at our peak periods, AM and PM. We looked at 15-minute sub-periods, and we were looking at average travel times from INREX, which is a private sector support. They give us information on travel times from cell phones, from Bluetooth devices, but we get a very good understanding of what's going on in our system because of that. And we looked at 3 months, March, April, May, so the beginning of the pandemic, and we looked at 2018 and 2019, and then obviously 2020 was the pandemic. And I'm going to pause, and we looked at 4 corridors in Nebraska, so some of our major ones in Lincoln and Omaha. We looked at our peak periods, we looked at 2 directions, so really 16 scenarios. Here's a picture of Dodge Street in Omaha. It's about 3 miles long. This one has about 80,000 AADT, and it's part of the national highway system. I'm going to apologize for showing you a graph, but I'll go over it fairly carefully. On the y-axis is the average 15-minute travel time over that 3-month period. So during this given AM peak, every 15 minutes, this is every observation we had for those 3 years. The gray one on the far left is 2018. The blue one in the middle is 2019. And the red is 2020 during the pandemic when we had this reduction in travel times. These are box plots. That gray line or that dark line in the middle of the box plot is the median or sort of the average travel time that people could experience. And you notice that there's a drop. And in fact, during the COVID pandemic, the mean travel time dropped about 17% on this corridor. The other thing we're interested in travel time is the spread, how much delay. So the width of the box that shows you how much spread you're getting, how much variability you're getting in your travel times. These dots up at the top are your outliers. So, in 2018 and 2019, we had a lot more spread than we did in 2020. If one of the measures of spread is standard deviation, that actually dropped 47%. So the variation in travel times dropped a lot more than the average travel time on this corridor. As you may indicate, I'm not going to show you 16 of these. We went through and looked at 16 analysis, but on average, the mean dropped about 14%. Mean travel time dropped about 14% on our major arterial corridors. The standard deviation of the spread dropped about 43%. The conclusion we came up with is no matter how you define reliability travel times, the travel times became more reliable. They were lower and they had less spread. So if you're a trucking firm, you had a lot more, it had a lot less delay, and you were able to design your routes a lot more efficiently because there was less because the reliability was greater. I want to just slightly change topics here. The U.S. transportation agencies do not use these common statistical metrics to measure reliability. They don't use mean or standard deviation. the argument is users don't understand, and I understand that one, right? Standard deviation, these types of things. So in their place, they've created a wide range of metrics. They've created travel time index, planning time index, level of travel time reliability, buffer index. Some of you may be familiar with these, but it's a way of trying to get what reliability is on a system. The next slide are the equations. I'm not going to go over them other than to just say, here they are. Some measure the mean, what's the average travel time? Some measure the spread. Some measure the relationship between the mean and spread. And each transportation agency will pick their own, which ones they're going to use to communicate with the population about what is more reliable. So a natural question is, during the COVID crisis, are the arterial roadways more reliable? So I picked 4 of the more popular metrics. And if you look at the numbers, you can see they vary a lot. So if you're using the buffer index, you'd say, oh, well, they're 35% more reliable during the COVID pandemic. If you're using the level of travel time reliability, this one right here, it's only 3% more reliable. So the question of, well, are the arterial roadways more reliable? That depends what metric you choose to use. I've highlighted the red one, the level of travel time reliability, only because it's the one used by, required by law by MAP 21 and the FAST Act to measure reliability of our transportation systems. So if you're using this metric to say how reliable our systems are, there's almost no difference in travel time reliability between the COVID pandemic and the non-COVID times. So again, there's a number of lessons there that I'll talk about. The COVID-19 had a profound effect on the transportation system. It was a natural experiment. How do we measure system performance? Really depends on the metrics. The crash rate's up, but the fatality rate's down. Travel time reliability, and some of those metrics, the one used by the US government, it's almost the same, although I doubt anyone on this call would say, yeah, my experience is reliability hasn't changed from 2018 and 2019 compared to 2020. So a number of lessons: reducing complex systems to simple metrics can be misleading. Yassmin was talking about having the researchers help with measuring the metrics, and yeah, knowing your data, knowing your statistics in order to make meaningful inferences are obviously very important. And that's what I wanted to get across from here on this talk on this very simple thing. I think what we're going to see from a university perspective, there's a lot of these research initiatives going on looking at behavioral changes. We're going to learn a lot. There's not a lot of benefits from this pandemic, but one of them is it is a natural experiment where we can actually learn whether our metrics are correct, learn how behavior is going, and look at ways of improving our system. I think we're going to see a lot more multidisciplinary work. I didn't really talk about it, but obviously the public health and the transportation are connected, and we're going to see a lot of work related to that. If you're interested in more information, Chris Hendrickson, who's our moderator today, and I wrote an editorial, COVID-19 Pandemic and Transportation Engineering in the ASCE, that covered some of these issues and really was designed to talk about what kinds of research we can do in the future and what the potential is related to the pandemic. A couple of acknowledgements. Obviously, what I talked about today was done by a research team. My postdoctoral researcher, Ernest Tufor, and my master science student, Sean Murphy, were the ones who helped collect the data and do the analysis. And I know we're going to save the questions to the end, but it was a pleasure to be here, and I'd be welcome any questions once everyone, all the other panelists are done speaking.
Well, thank you, Larry. And it was a pleasure doing that paper with you. Vincent.
Thanks very much. And let me share my slides with you. Can you see that?
No, we don't.
Oh, you don't? Okay. Let me try again.
There it comes.
How about now?
Now we see it.
Great, great. Well, it's a pleasure for me to be here, particularly in my capacity as the executive director for the SPC, particularly after coming out of 20 years working at the federal level and being able now to see the impact of all of these innovations and these societal changes at the local level. What I wanted to do today was talk a little bit about the perspective in terms of decision making at the local level. I'm not going to speak so much about what we've done or what we're planning to do in the near future. I want to really kind of take a more academic approach at this and really kind of think about how we can perhaps set up a decision-making process for helping to make society more resilient and making our transportation systems more resilient. I think I can dare say, and a number of people have mentioned it, that COVID has really kind of tested our democratic systems. It's really kind of revealed fault lines in our society. And in terms of really thinking about how we make decisions in terms of our transportation networks, and really going back to the last presentation, which was about equity. So both Jill and Mariah, well, all of them, Mariah, Sophia, Carol, Jill, spoke about equity. And that's an important factor that we have to think about, especially as we go forward in terms of our society and how resilient it is. First thing I want to do is I want to thank one of my most strategic thinkers. She's absolutely brilliant. She's part of my think tank here at SPC, and that's Kathy Stefani. She really has helped gel this concept and this thinking around what we do to structure a better decision-making system around the projects that we're going to decide on at the local level and how we're going to ensure that equity is baked into it. The basic concept that you see here is that access is the pediment or the top of the Parthenon, if you will. It really is what we're all looking for. We're looking for how to do the things in life that we really want to do. Get to our doctor's appointments, get to work, get to whatever it is that is of interest to us and of importance to us in the moment. And the premise is that the foundation of that Parthenon, if you will, is connectivity and mobility. So how do we make good decisions in terms of ensuring equitable and good quality connectivity and mobility for the people that we serve? And so working with Kathy, working with our think tank here, Anthony Hickton, Tom Clavan, Andy Waple, and others in the SPC, we've developed a number of assumptions that I think are important to consider as we think about that decision-making process. If you will, assumption number one, and I think of these more as being factors than decisions. Public transportation is here to stay. Carol was very articulate about the service, about the importance of public transportation, but I can dare say that the evolution of transportation is upon us. We're not going to see the same old modes and the same old ways of providing service. We need to be able to help public transportation evolve and serve a more diverse ridership. We know that ridership numbers are down. We don't know that they will recover. I'm hoping that they will, but we have to expect that things are different, that the pre-COVID and post-COVID worlds are going to be very different. Assumption number two, if you can see that. Telemobility is the new norm. I think what we're doing here today is emblematic of that. And it's going to lead to significant travel demand changes. I think destinations and origins are going to see significant changes. Chuck, in the previous presentation, mentioned the aspect of not having even enough freight capacity, for example. So these are things that we're going to be having to contend with as we think about local projects and think about implementation and deployment of technology and of transportation projects at the local level. Assumption number three, that federally subsidized on-demand door-to-door ride-hailing will replace traditional shared paratransit. Again, it goes to the equity issue. Are we really serving people in the way that they need to be served? If people are not getting that granularity of service in terms of, for example, one of us being able to take an Uber ride and call an Uber ride in 2 or 3 minutes, yet someone using paratransit has to wait an hour and schedule 24 hours in advance. Are we utilizing our technology to the utmost in order to provide equitable and fair and optimized service for that part of our community? Assumption number 4. There will be a growth in the number of delivery vehicles on the streets and roads. Again, Chuck mentioned that. Chuck mentioned the capacity for delivering freight. Basically, virtual retail is here to stay. And the question is, how are we going to accommodate that, particularly in a society that has changed its preferences? People aren't going to the brick and mortar stores anymore. During COVID, we're not even supposed to go there. So how do we accommodate that change in our society, in our assumptions? Number 5, environmental concerns will be acknowledged and addressed with more emphasis on smart and green transportation. While I was working at the FTA, and I can tell you this definitively, these are not just a matter of climate change and environmental equity. These are elements of an emerging technology base that represents a new economic sector. Other countries are working on green and smart technologies as we speak, as you all know, and it's incumbent on us to develop that technology and be able to develop the sector so that we can compete with those countries. So it becomes more of an economic issue as well as the very real environmental concerns. Number 6, microtransit will become more prevalent in underserved communities. Again, thinking about the change in public transportation, going back to assumption 1 or factor number 1, as I would prefer to call them, thinking about how we can optimize existing networks, existing infrastructure, such as our streets, and be able to provide that granular service that is in a form that people want to consume nowadays. Assumption number 7, and this is really about multimodal hubs being located in communities. Again, thinking about how we are providing multimodal service and planning for that and making smart decisions, because at the end of the day, and Secretary Gramian mentioned it, we're not really necessarily going to see the same levels of revenues. Are we going to recover the revenues that we had pre-COVID? I don't know if that's the case. But that said, we need to make intelligent decisions as we do our planning, and we need to have an overall framework for making it. And again, these multimodal hubs are a way of actualizing that efficiency, of optimizing those resources that we already have. And then finally, or I should say number 8, excuse me, that land use is an ecosystem. It's not just a commodity. Again, going back to number 7, thinking about how we take care and steward our resources, that being land use in this case. Again, where I think about where academia can help and where research can help, I think it would be important to develop metrics that reflect this holistic approach. We've advocated here at SPC for a multimodal mobility index. How could we develop one that's looking at the individual, and whether you're talking about package delivery or an individual's ability to navigate an entire region, how do we provide better granularity, better insight into transportation decisions, or the decision not to travel at all and do something in a virtual space? So that's an important element that I think academia could help us with. Number 2, training planners who think holistically and not isolated to either a mode or the technical aspect of planning. How do we think, again, about a systemic approach as opposed to the individual pieces of the system? I think also it's important to think about alternative governance. We're talking about a new world order here. We're talking about a new paradigm for transportation planning, for transportation decision-making. How do we figure out what the right governance of that is, specifically as emerging technologies come our way? Automation, for example, a national automated freight system is going to be more similar to our aviation system than it is to what it is than it is now in terms of our highway system. How do we monitor that? How do we make sure that it's safe? How do we make sure that it's optimized and that the private sector that's going to be playing a role in it has a way of really benefiting from that as much as the public sector is going to benefit. So again, thinking about these holistic approaches, thinking about a broad systemic approach. So with that, I'm looking forward to the conversation after all the presentations. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Vincent. That's a lot for us all to think about in a short amount of time. I will now turn it over to Connie.
Okay, I think that Vincent needs to unshare.
Oh, where am I here?
Yeah. Well, while we're waiting, I'll just introduce myself real quick. I am Connie McGee. I manage the Commute with Enterprise program in the San Francisco Bay Area. I am also the board president for the Association for Commuter Transportation, otherwise known as ACT. And I want to talk to you about a little bit about ACT and what we've been doing to aid our members during COVID. It's been interesting to listen to these presentations, and I think that my presentation will kind of be bring it to a different level. I'm talking about transportation demand management and more for the employer and the commuter. There we go. Okay, let me share my screen. Get myself to. Oh, went to the end. That didn't work. There we go. Skip the introduction. So I want to talk to you a little bit about ACT and who we are so that you can, many people probably aren't as familiar with ACT as they, at this presentation today. So ACT is the premier association for TDM professionals, and our goal is to build a strong community of individuals and organizations that are working to advance and implement TDM at their work sites and within their communities, and their goal of creating an efficient transportation system that moves people, reduces congestion, improves air quality, and supports economic activity. ACT gives us the latest information and best practices in TDM. ACT provides valuable professional development opportunities with dozens of virtual, and eventually we will be going back to in-person events. We support the growth of the TDM professionals from the moment they enter the field until they retire through mentoring, leadership, development, and of course, we just launched the professional certification via our TDM CP exam. ACT works to advance the entire TDM industry through advocacy and influence of federal, state, and local policies supportive of TDM. We are at a very important point in time in regards to building support for TDM at federal levels, as ACT has succeeded in incorporating TDM throughout the recently introduced More Through TDM Act and Invest in America Act. As the largest network of TDM professionals, bringing together over 1,200 of colleagues and peers from across major employers and universities, TMAs, government agencies across the United States, we're creating a community to learn from and collaborate with. This has been invaluable this past year as we have had to deal with the challenges brought on by the global pandemic. It's been wonderful, really wonderful to watch hundreds of members gather on our weekly call and working together to develop our recently released resource document on how to support commuters returning to work post-COVID. I'm going to spend a couple minutes discussing that. Throughout this crisis, ACT has looked for ways that we can support our members. We started in May by having weekly Zoom discussions on various topics around the current challenges that COVID provided, including recovering and reopening plans, TDM leading the way during COVID, changing the commute message post-COVID, In late May, we brought together about 30 of our members from various segments of the industry to discuss how we can help employers get back to the office safely. We put together these guidelines based on what we knew from the CDC and the World Health Organization. This resource is available for free on our website at actweb.org, so we certainly encourage everybody to go ahead and download that. ACT's resource provides tips and guidance for specific that are specific to each mode. But there are common suggestions for employers, services providers, and commuters, no matter which mode were presented. The document was well received and was distributed across the country to ACT and non-ACT members. I heard from many people reaching out to us on how thankful they were to have something that they could run for us as a guide. At the time, there had actually been there had been guidance on how to return to work safely, but nothing in regards to safe commuting. And certainly we had a huge concern of everybody just hopping into their solo vehicles and creating huge congestion issues. The resource was separated by tips, by mode tips, and provided for employers, service providers, and commuters. In this section of the resource guide on public transportation, as you can see, we wanted to cover all aspects of those reading it, giving some of these tips for everybody. This allows the guide to really be useful to a large range of our membership. Some of the advice is similar between different modes. For example, communication, flexibility, serving, following cleaning protocols. Another example on micro mobility, you can see some similarities, but some specific modes, we gave specific guidelines, such as in the use of proper hand signals and safe riding, especially as there may be new users to this particular mode. We have already updated this guide once since it was put together in June, and we are working right now to review and update to move into the new phases and have learned and received new guidance, such as the use of face coverings. So in addition to the return to work resource, ACT worked with members across the country to conduct a commuter survey to gather an understanding on potential impacts on mode shift and commuter behavior. The Center for TDM is the research arm of ACT. So it is part of ACT, the 501(c), researching and disseminating information to educate and advance adoptions of TDM. Over the summer, we put together a survey to understand how people were traveling pre-COVID and how they anticipate to travel post-COVID. We plan to look at this again as the return to office increases to see any shifts and changes in mode. Over 10,000 responses were received, with a large percentage of responses from California, Hawaii, Vermont, Arizona, and Tennessee. Mode use prior to the pandemic showed that we had a greater response rate from people utilizing non-drive alone modes, which was desired to understand how those commuters might be impacted. We figured that anyone driving alone before would likely continue to do so, or if they were changing, would likely change to telecommuting. In looking at their plans, the plans for returning to work, 77% plan to use the same mode, 11% a different mode, and 12% were unsure. Major shifts in the modes you would anticipate there to be shifts in. So public transit, commuter rail, carpool, ferry service, all seeing major shifts to driving alone. Telecommuting across the board from modes was the highest percentage from those that drove alone. Of interest is also the significant number of commuters looking to shift to bike and scooter, although because we did this in the summer, I imagine there was a seasonal effect in that data. So looking into the future, 2 to 3 months, there was a high level of comfort with telework, bike, walk, scooter, but far more discomfort with options like carpool, transit, etc. When looking at what would make them more willing to use other modes, action skewed heavily towards health-related measures and less on financial incentives, though each option showed a 50% plus response for more willing. We are currently working with Texas A&M to dive deeper into the survey data and we'll be publishing a report in the near future. In addition, we will be doing a follow-up survey next year as we see the shift back to the office. So I hope this was helpful in understanding ACT and our role in promoting TDM and TDM measures, as well as our efforts to assist our employers and commuters get to work safely during COVID, something other than driving alone. So thank you, appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. We can now turn and take a few questions. We have a few minutes to do questions, and I don't know whether we'll get through all the questions. And Lisa Kay has reminded me that there's a board that you can post your observations, and she's put that into the chat group, so you can take a look at that. Let me start with the earliest question from Eric, and I think this is intended for Larry. What about average speeds independent of speeding?
I can add a little context to that as well, since it was
Go ahead,
quite
Eric.
a while ago. I noticed all the reasons for the increase in traffic fatalities relative to the amount of VMT were all related to personal behavior. So there's definitely been an increase in drinking, increase in reckless driving. But what about just congestion overall and the effects on average speeds?
Sure. So so anecdotally, the speeds have increased, and we've seen that in our travel times, and the variability's gone down. And because of that, we were talking about research. There's been a number of effects. We have a project looking at queuing, advanced queuing, and you have this issue with work zones and creating queues. And in Nebraska, the volumes are so low that we couldn't even measure queues, let alone the reaction of people to them. Work zones were working very well. So while travel times were lower, speeds were a bit higher. It was these sort of outliers of individual drivers that were causing a lot of the issues with the safety. The data I showed were for average. But it does go back to the importance of looking at individual behavior as well, where you have this small group of people doing things that are fairly, that are illegal and taking advantage of it. And the reality is that our state patrol in Nebraska actually went out and increased their enforcement activities to take into account that, to try and reduce it. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but yeah, I think it's looking at things individually has an effect. The other issue that came up, and Chuck sort of indicated it, is that while freight went down, it didn't go down as much as passenger cars. So we still had a lot of freight traffic on our roadways and obviously on the railways.
Thank you.
Thanks. Our second question is from Caitlin Hughes, and I think it's directed to you, Chuck. Caitlin, do you want to ask your question? Well, you might be on mute here. I'll read it. What kind of innovations did you see at way stations or roadside for contactless inspection? Have you noticed whether any states are allowing drivers to download permits on their phones instead of printing them? Are there any rest area changes that were supportive to the needs this spring, summer that you think would be beneficial to make a permanent practice? So 3 questions in one, Chuck. You're on mute.
Okay, I'm not sure I can answer them all, but I'll answer which ones I can. Am I good now with Chris?
Okay.
Okay. As far as the rest areas, there's an obvious presence of people sanitizing. So when you go in there, you could tell that the place is being sanitized at all time. The food lines all have the social distancing markers on the floor, so that's good. Because again, the drivers sometimes count on these places for their meals, for their evening meals and such. As far as the wait stations, I can't answer that. I'm not familiar with that. And as far as the permits, there's none I'm aware of just yet that you can download onto your phone, but I'm sure that's in the works.
Yeah, my understanding was that a lot of the way stations are now contactless. It's all electronic.
Well, I think it was moving to that prior to COVID as well.
Yep. Just like turnpike toll collections.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Natalie has the next question, and you have a series of questions in here. Would you like to hop on and ask your most pressing question, Natalie? Whoop, you're on mute. I'll read the first one. Does your data allow you to look at changes in long distance travel as compared with more urbanized, typically shorter trip travel? I guess that would be directed to Chuck and Larry.
Well, as far as our trucks operate the same as they did pre-COVID. So I don't see any difference there. Now, traffic is a lot less, mostly car traffic, which has helped a lot.
Just following up on the question regarding the data, it's a very exciting time for researchers because we actually have access because of these GPS and cell phone data and Bluetooth data that we get a lot more information than we could have before, particularly on individual drivers. So the answer is yes, we can get access to that if we make the right connections with the private vendors, or we have our state's sponsors get that. So it's a great time for that. So yeah, we can look at it. Ours was just looking at these arterial corridors, but we could certainly do the entire interstate system on Nebraska if we wanted to. We have that capability now.
And one more comment, Chris, at least as trucking is concerned, and this has started well pre-COVID with the rise of Amazon, is that the distribution centers for all the big retailers are now going closer to neighborhoods so they can offer same day and next day service. So those travel times are shorter than what they would have been historically.
Yeah, they're consolidating to go into those regional hubs.
Mm-hmm. They're putting the regional hubs closer to neighborhoods.
Yep. Well, in the future, we may see drone delivery, Chuck.
Yeah, of course.
All right, the next question is from Rob. Rob, are you still on?
Yeah, I'm here.
Go ahead.
So I guess my question for Larry is, you seem to have a problem with the way that the federal performance measures for reliability, and particularly the loader score. Has your research given way to any push to try to make that make a better score, and especially since program funding is dependent on whether or not states are meeting their targets in some of these areas?
Thanks, Rob. That's a good question. So the research I just showed you is literally done within the last few months. So it was one section of Nebraska. We haven't looked at it nationally, which would be the next section. I guess my argument would be if we're using metrics to measure reliability and we cannot identify changes in reliability that happen because of COVID, we might want to consider other metrics. I think this is fairly typical. It's not that the metric was wrong, it's measuring one specific thing, and reliability has multiple dimensions. So the real question is, how do you get metrics that measure those dimensions? And then what weights do you put on those different dimensions? Is it more important to have a reduction in average travel time? More important to have a reduction in the space, the variability? Or is there some relationship between them? So I think we're just at the beginning. What I really wanted to point out was that if you're looking for any benefit to the pandemic, and there aren't many, is that it allows us to do some research that we might not normally have been able to do and come up with some interesting findings. So good question. Thank you.
And I noticed I skipped over a question. This is from Natalie. Has Nebraska considered if there is more demand for bicycle and pedestrian travel?
Yeah, I think Nebraska, just everything we've measured, and I think it's across the country, I don't think it's anything new, and I think some of the other speakers have addressed it, is that public transit went significantly down. And then other types of passenger traffic went down, but other things actually went up, including pedestrian and cycling. They also had some interesting ones from a university perspective, and I'm sure other agencies have the same thing. We're no longer allowed to share rides for obvious reasons. So in a lot of ways, our number of passenger trips went up. We're going out for a research project. We're hiring 2 or 3 cars, so each researcher can drive out to the site to collect the data because of COVID, and hopefully that'll go away soon. So, but in general, yeah, the demand for cycling and pedestrians went up, and demand for transit went down.
Connie, do you want to add anything to that question on bicycle and pedestrian travel?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I apologize.
The question was, is there more demand for bicycle and pedestrian travel?
Yeah, well, I think that initially there was certainly what we found in our findings, and a lot of that had to do with the time of year. It's, you know, as rain and weather has changed, I think that that's changing as well. But certainly what we call active transportation has taken, has definitely taken a lead. Where people can do it, they are doing it. We're certainly seeing that.
Okay, thank you. And this will be our last question because we're running out of time, and it's for Vincent. And it comes from Stephen Quick. Stephen, do you want to pose the question?
Sure, Chris. Let me just get my video off here. There we go. Yes, I know that bicycles and walking are, you know, the usual ones, but when we have steep topography like we have throughout Pittsburgh, how do you see, could you tell us what you're thinking about the use of microtransit in these conditions? What types of transit and so on do you see?
Yeah, I do see a major role for microtransit in most communities, not just here. Actually, it makes sense in many communities where the investment in larger fixed route buses is no longer really kind of the right thing to be doing for a number of reasons. Social preferences, ridership choices, and just the cost. I mean, it's a $500,000 investment when you might be able to deliver better point-to-point service or first mile, last mile service with a smaller investment in a smaller vehicle, and maybe employing artificial intelligence and other capabilities that we have nowadays that you can optimize routes and optimize origin destination for people. So I see it as playing a more significant role in the future. I think, you know, one of the things that we're going to have to think about in terms of public transportation, and I know it's a lot of my colleagues, again, I worked at the FTA for 20 years, and I know a lot of my colleagues are thinking about it, is how do you overcome the public fear of getting on a large vehicle or on a mass transit vehicle, whether it's a heavy rail system or a bus, and that a smaller vehicle might actually go to mitigating that in some respects. So for many reasons, microtransit, I think, will be a model that we come to depend on more in the future.
Can I actually add to that? So in the Bay Area, I manage the Van-Pool program for Enterprise. And that is one of the things that we're finding to be, the conversation is really going that direction with a lot of employers we work with are discontinuing their shuttle programs and not planning to bring shuttles back once they go back to the office, but are going to be relying more heavily on Van-Pools. So we're seeing that now with some of the manufacturing companies we work with that are going to the office, and we're seeing an increase in Van-Pools for them. And the prime reason is they can control it. You know, the individuals can control it. You know who's getting in and out of that vehicle at all times. It's only being used for commute purposes. It has high traceability. So if somebody does contract COVID, we can actually trace it back, because it's not being used necessarily for family members to go back and forth or for anybody else. It's literally the same, what we call, you know, family of people who are, you know, commuting daily to and from work. So yes, I absolutely agree that that the microtransit and Van-Pool included will actually start to see an increase in that.
Well, thank you. And I think that'll be the last word. I'd like to thank our panel for what I think was a very, very informative session. Virtual applause to all of you. And I'll turn it over to Lisa Kay to talk about tomorrow's agenda.
First of all, we'd like to thank everybody for being with us today. If you didn't get a chance to ask your question or add your suggestion, please feel free to do that on our idea board. Also, just want to invite you all back tomorrow. You already have the Zoom connection, so you're good to go. Tomorrow, we will be having 4 sessions on UTC research and education initiatives and research projects. The first kicks off at 11 o'clock. And I'm not going to read all of these to you, but they are on our agenda webpage. And we have the last of them that will be at 2:45 to 3:45 in the afternoon. We will be trying out some different interactive ways with the breakout sessions through Zoom. So we'd like to invite you to join us for that. Raj, is there anything you'd like to add as we're closing today?
Thank you, Lisa Kay. First of all, thanks to you and to Chris for that two very good panels, excellent panelists, very, very thoughtful and insightful comments. I guess overall, please stay engaged. We want your problems so that we can help solve them together. Think equity, think how we can deal with a future pandemic. We have learned a lot over these past several months. We should put in place a framework to deal with any future pandemics as well. So please be in touch. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for today and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Nice job.